Seth, when did you hire, what year was it that you hired your first employee? Do you remember?
Well, actually, soon after, it was like I started in 1980, and then I was at a demo at Nature's in Portland, and this guy comes in, and it was actually, he knew about tempeh. He knew all about tempeh, and I was like, how do you know about tempeh? He says, well, I just came from the farm in Tennessee, which is where I learned about tempeh, which was this commune of, I think it was like 1,500 hippies were living in this commune, and they were all vegans, which they didn't even call it vegan at that time, you know, somebody that doesn't eat any animal products. They called it pure vegetarians. And so he had just come from there, and he had started the tempeh lab there. There was a culture lab where, you know, it's a fermented product, tempeh is, so you need this Rhizopus oligosporus, which is a mold culture that ferments the beans and makes them more digestible, and it's the magic part of tempeh. And he was a PhD microbiologist, and so I hired him to make the culture and work with me, and so he was the first employee, and that was about 1981 or 82, and I had a couple other friends that helped me out in that stage too, but it was, you know, we were too small to really pay anybody anything. Then
when did you actually move the business up to, well, because you were in Hewsum for a while.
Yeah.
So when did you move to Hewsum?
Well, so by 1982, I was pretty tired of working at night, you know, all the time, and we were growing a little bit, and there was a few distributors then. As like I was started out the only distributor just driving around Portland, and then some natural food distributors came to me, and there was one in Portland, and they said, oh, we'll take you to Seattle and Eugene, and I was like, wow, that'll be great. And then
Did they?
Yeah, they did. And so at that point I needed a bigger space, and my friends had moved up to Trout Lake, and I wanted to be in the country, so I was driving all around Forest Grove and Trout Lake and Hewsum looking for a place to make tempeh. And I looked in the Hewsum school, and it was sitting vacant, and it was just perfect. It was like they had this stainless steel sinks and floor drains and this little kitchen, and it was just sitting vacant because it was built during the logging era, the 50s and 60s, when logging was just like hot and happening. And then as that died down, the school didn't have enough people, and they consolidated into White Salmon. And so I said, boy, looks like a great place. And I called up the school district, and they said, wow, you want to rent this? It's just been sitting. We'd love to have somebody in there. And I was like, okay, let's go and talk. And so I offered them, they said, what could you pay? And this is 13,000 square feet, 4 classrooms, a gymnasium, and, you know, the kitchen all set up. And so I was like, there's a negotiation. I was grossing $1,300 a month then, so didn't have a lot of money. And I was like, yeah, how about $160 a month? And they were like, sold, you know, and so they took it. So I had this gym, and we'd play basketball and show movies, and 4 classrooms, and I could rent out, you know, the classrooms and everything. So it was just like perfect, and the kitchen was just what I needed, and didn't have money to invest in sinks and drains and everything.
Yeah,
so
that was already all there.
So anyways, in 1982, we set up in Hewsum, and you know, the Enterprise had these big headlines, you know, tempeh plant opens in Hewsum, and people were calling me up like, do you need a receptionist? And I was like, yeah, well, I'll let you know when we get big enough. But because it was very, you know, rural. And
right. Was it just still you and one other person, and maybe a little bit of friends?
Pretty much it was just 2 of us, 2, 3, actually there was 3 employees, and they came with me, so we didn't really hire anybody locally, and we were all living off, you know, nuts and beans, eating a lot of our product.
And you were actually living in a tree house.
Well, that was later.
Oh, that was a little later.
You know, a little bit later. I was still trying to struggle, like, where do you live, and don't have much money, and so I decided, you know, a friend of mine had built a tree house in Trout Lake, and I thought, wow, that's a pretty good idea, you know, and so a friend lent me well, she rented me 4 trees in her yard, you know, to build this treehouse, and I built a little treehouse for a couple $1,000s, and it was very comfy, you know.
Yeah.
It had a kitchen and sleeping loft and a little cupola, so it was 3-story, and heat and a telephone, and
So really a little
very
house.
comfy.
just
Yeah,
in the trees.
it was a great little house, you know, very snug and warm in the winter, you know.
Yeah.
Wood stove. would
How long
keep
did you live in
warm.
there?
I lived there for 8 years.
8 years.
Actually.
Wow.
And so it was really helped me keep, you know, the overhead low, because, you know, I was making a little bit more money then. We were growing, but still we were regional, just selling tempeh up and down the West Coast. And,
Yeah.
you know, most of the time now my salary was like $300 a month, you know, for all those years. It was about that, but it was good years too, you know. I mean, you had good time for doing stuff. And
Was there always still that one of these days this thing could really take off?
there really wasn't, you know. At that point I had just sort of resigned myself. We're going to be a little cottage industry.
And you were fine with that?
I was fine with that, you know, I guess, and I considered selling it a couple times and writing. I was going to write a book on tree houses, and I actually started that, and then there was sort of at a time, there was a jumping off point where are you going to sell the business, and somebody offered me like $25,000 for the business. You know, he was a tofu maker in Seattle, and so I was like, $25,000, it's a little low even for, you know, a business that isn't doing a whole lot. So
Yeah.
anyways,
you
decided to
passed
keep
on
it.
that.
And at that time, around that time, I met my wife, Sue, and you know, we got married, and she had a house in Trout Lake, and then we soon got pregnant with our son, Luke. So came down from the tree and moved the business to Hood River in 1992, because the port was trying to find tenants, and they were courting me and anybody they could find to move into the Groff building at 601 Industrial down there. And so we moved in with, there was 3 other tenants. There was like a metal shop and a water company, H2 Oregon actually, that's still in the Dalles. They were in there, and the Full Sail was just starting up there, and they had a keg washing station right above us, and
Really?
they kept dripping down through the floors, all their residue, you know, and it was just down to my office there.
Man.
So it was, you know, they were just getting the building going.
Yeah.
And-
Well,
but they were
interesting
good
times. Well, when we come back, I want to talk about when, because you bought that building, you own
Yes.
that building now. You've
Yes.
continued to expand, and the business has grown and grown over the years. And so I want to talk to you a bit about that expansion. So we'll hear more about how things progressed and where the future of Turtle Islands sits. So be right back.
Up next,
There's a sense of fun, you know, with the tofurkey and the business and the name and everything we do. We try and incorporate, you know, some fun in it. But it's very also, satisfying, and you know, we feel like we play an important role in the natural food world.